The morning I learned my house had been sold while I was still alive, two men with a laser measure were clicking in my living room like they'd been sent by God to count all the inches I'd earned and make sure they fit in someone else's pocket. I had a pot roast in the oven and a sweater half finished in my lap. The white van outside said Shoreline Home Buyers, and a girl, hard hat on like she might hit her head on my wreath, asked me if Marjorie could sign the access addendum so they could get into the crawl space and turn off the gas. I told her I was Marjorie. She looked at the clipboard, then at me, and something in her shifted, like a polite train switching tracks. "Oh, I am so sorry. We didn't expect anyone to be home." People rarely expect old women to be home, even in their own homes. I set down my knitting and asked what she meant by access addendum. She explained there would be a pre-close walkthrough and that the sellers had agreed the buyers could begin light demolition, carpet removal, before the close for schedule efficiency. I asked her who the sellers were. She said, "The estate of Marjorie Ellis." Estate is a word people use when they believe you've run out of time. I walked her to the door, slow and steady, like guiding a raccoon out of a pantry, and shut it behind them. The men waited by the van, trading looks like somebody had miscalculated. My hands shook as I turned the deadbolt. Not fear, not yet. Scalding clarity. The pot roast was already perfuming the house. I turned the oven off, unplugged the phone, and sat down. I listened for anything that proved the house still belonged to me. The hum of the fridge, the wind fussing with the cedar out back, the tick of an old clock. Then I got up and took the spare key from the ceramic dish by the sink and slid it into my pocket like a soldier reaching for a medal he finally decided he'd earned. I'm 72. I taught first grade for 3 decades in a town where I can still walk into the grocery store and hear, "Mrs. Ellis," in a voice that once couldn't tie its shoes. My husband, Bill, died 6 winters ago under a January sky that had no business being that blue. Our daughter, Lena, is grown, married, and, if you ask her, too busy to breathe. If you ask me, she's always been busy, even in her crib, tiny hands clutching at the air like there wasn't enough of it. When Bill and I paid off this house, we opened a bottle of the cheap sparkling stuff and drank out of coffee mugs because the real champagne would come later, when we retired, when we traveled, when we sat under a different sky and guessed at constellations. The best laid plans of Midge and Bill. After the van left, I called the county recorder's office. The clerk put me on hold long enough for me to imagine falling asleep at my own closing. When she returned, her voice was careful. "Yes, Ms. Ellis, there was a deed recorded last Thursday, grantor, Marjorie Ruth Ellis by attorney in fact L. Mahoney. Grantee, Shoreline Lakefront Partners, LLC, by attorney in fact," I repeated, as if the words tasted different when I said them myself. "Looks like the power of attorney was recorded the same day," she said, and read an instrument number aloud like a sentence. I thanked her and hung up. I know what a power of attorney is. Bill and I signed durable powers after his first bypass, the kind you file away, praying they never have to be used, like a casserole dish for a casserole nobody wants. Ours named each other. When he died, I updated mine. It named my daughter. I didn't name her because she is kind. I named her because she is capable. Turns out, those are not the same thing. I poured coffee and stared at the cup until the steam stopped being a thing and became a memory. Then I dialed Lena. "Mom?" Her voice was sunshine filtered through an Instagram story. Behind it, I heard the ping of a text arriving, the ding of a life happening elsewhere. "Did you sell my house?" I asked. Silence sat down between us. I could hear her inhale. "Mom," she said, putting on the yoga voice she uses when calling to tell me I'm overreacting to the idea of mortgage-backed securities. "You told me years ago you wanted options. You said if there ever came a time you couldn't manage." "I cooked pot roast this morning. I can manage a shoulder of beef. I can manage a house." My thumb pressed a crescent into the ceramic mug. "Did you sell my house?" She exhaled. "We had to move quickly. There's a window in the market and Caleb says, Caleb, my son-in-law, who always speaks like he's presenting a TED Talk no one asked for, who wears a smartwatch that looks like it can measure whether he feels remorse. He flips houses. He flips phrases. He flips the truth and calls it positive spin. He calls me Marge instead of Mom because it sounds like a friendly man with a mechanic's shop. Lena, I said, and used the teacher voice that lifted 30 children out of chaos and into something like attention. What did you use to sell my house? Mom, we used the power of attorney. The durable one you signed after Dad died. You said you trusted me to do the right thing, and you decided the right thing was to treat me like a ghost. Don't be dramatic. She slid into exasperation, the old familiar. The plan was to get you into something safer. You almost tripped on the back steps behind the carport last spring, remember? And the roof needs work, and the taxes are... So you sold my house while I was still making pot roast in it, I said. You sold it to a limited liability company with a lake in its name, and you came over for Sunday supper twice this month without saying a word. It was going to be a surprise, she said. You don't surprise people by removing the floor. Silence. Then she said softly, "Are you okay?" A question like a Band-Aid pulled halfway off. I said I was fine. I hung up. Then I stood in the middle of my living room and discovered that fury can be a clean thing, like a newly made bed. I called my neighbor, Nina Park. Nina is 68, dry as a bone, and twice as useful. She worked for 3 decades as a clerk in the county courthouse and knows the difference between a notary who follows rules and a notary who attends barbecues. She came over carrying a legal pad, a pen, and lemon squares wrapped in wax paper. Because she was raised correctly. She listened. She ate half a square and slid the rest toward me. We're going to undo what can be undone, she said, and document what can't. She sat at my dining table and made 3 columns. County, bank, lawyer. First, she said, we cloud the title. File a lis pendens, notice of pending action. You'll need a lawyer to draft it, but between now and then, we can still put a stick in their spokes. Second, you revoke the power of attorney in writing. Today, send copies everywhere Lena might try to use it. Third, we call your insurance agent and your bank manager to put flags on everything they know how to flag. Fourth, we get you a mental competence letter from your physician, because if your daughter is willing to sell your house with you inside it, she's willing to file for guardianship and call you confused. I stared at her. Nina, do you really think... People surprise you when there's money involved, she said. They become creative. She opened her phone and tapped so fast I felt like I was watching a magician. Okay, elder law, Ava Rosen, she's good. Used to prosecute white-collar crime before she got sense and opened her own shop. She looked up. Can you be downtown at 2? I could. I wrote the appointment time on my palm with the pen and watched the ink seep into the skin. Ownership, in one crude line. While Nina printed a template letter to revoke the power of attorney, I went into the bedroom and pulled the fireproof box out from under the bed. It still smelled like the packets of silica gel it came with, a sterile kind of safety. I lifted out the original power of attorney. My signature sat there like a woman waiting for her ride. I had signed it in the funeral home lobby while arranging Bill's service, a week I remember in yellow light and casserole dishes. I'd been told to plan for everything. The everything that gets planned for is never the thing that happens. Nina had me sign and date the revocation letter. We made copies. She stapled and stuck Post-its on everything like we were babying a jury. You bring this to the bank, she said, and this to Dr. Patel so she can put it in your chart. This to the insurance company. And first, here. She slid the original POA into a plastic sleeve and handed it to me. Take it with you. If anyone tries to wave a copy around, you wave this harder. When I went to pick up my purse, I noticed my husband's fishing hat on the peg. It still had a folded dollar tucked into the band from the morning we stopped for bait, and the shop's debit card machine was down. I tucked the hat into the tote because sometimes you just need proof that a man who loved you once loved you enough to think about minnows and cash. Nina drove me downtown because she didn't trust my hands. We passed a new coffee shop, a boutique insurance storefront with all glass walls, a yoga studio with a chalkboard out front that said, "You are enough," in someone's careful hand. It was a pretty day, blue enough to make you think goodness might be structural. I held that thought the way you hold a stair rail when your foot doesn't trust the next step. The law office smelled like old carpet and the kind of coffee that is more habit than drink. Ava Rosen met us in the lobby. She had a face that manages to be kind and impatient at the same time. I liked her immediately. She ushered us into a room with a round table and a window that looked onto other windows. I told her everything. She listened without writing anything down, which is either a trick or a sign of a good mind. When I finished, she asked to see the documents. I slid the power of attorney across the table like a woman showing a card she regrets ever picking up. She read it carefully, then the revocation. She nodded. "Here's what we're going to do," she said. "First, we file an emergency petition for a temporary restraining order to prevent any transfer or demolition pending a hearing. Second, we record your revocation. Third, we file a lis pendens to cloud title so the buyers cannot close cleanly. Fourth, we send a demand letter to the buyer and the title company informing them of the dispute and the likely rescission action. Fifth, we get you a statement of capacity from your doctor in case your daughter files a guardianship petition." She looked up, her eyes steady. "And sixth, if there's forgery or notary misconduct, we involve the district attorney." I felt the floor return gradually to its place under my feet. "Do people do this often?" I asked. "Often enough," she said. "Elder financial exploitation is a growth industry. Family makes it personal." "How much will it cost?" I asked, because even now, even in this room, the arithmetic of my life still mattered. "Less than your house," she said. "I'll keep it lean." "I want you to sleep in your own bed," she drafted while I sat there listening to the sound of her keyboard, the hum of a copier, the air conditioner deciding whether to commit. Nina squeezed my hand under the table like a secret handshake between women who've seen worse and lived. By 4, we had papers to sign. Ava walked me through each page, pointing out the places where the words did the work I needed done. "This is the affidavit," she said. "You swear to the facts." I swore. "This is the proposed TRO." I initialed the margin like I was an approving aunt. As we left, she said, "Do not let anyone into your house. If anyone shows up with a letter or a badge, you call me. If your daughter calls, tell her all communications go through counsel." I nodded, grateful for words like counsel, grateful for the fierce utility of women who've read the rules. At the county clerk's office, Nina planted us at a window and used a smile that has gotten stamps put on the right forms for 40 years. We recorded the revocation. The clerk's stamp thudded down, turning paper into something a little more real. "Do you have anyone at the bank who knows you by name?" Nina asked as we walked out into the gold of late afternoon. "Ellen," I said. "She's the branch manager. She came to my classroom once to talk to the kids about saving. Brought little plastic pigs. Perfect," Nina said. "You'll call her in the morning." Today, you rest. That evening, the house glowed like a memory that refused to fade. I torqued the deadbolt. I put the finished pot roast into the fridge and the sweater back in my lap. I knit 6 tight rows and then pulled them out because tight rows never lie right. At 9:30, Lena called. I watched her name bloom across the screen and let it go to voicemail. She called again, then a text. "Mom, please answer. Caleb says there's a schedule, and if we don't meet it, the buyers can sue." I set the phone down on the cushion beside me and watched the blue dot hover near the doorbell camera on the app. Someone standing outside long enough to make technology think about me. It was Lena. I watched in a kind of calm horror as she lifted her own key from her purse and tried the lock. It didn't turn. I had changed it that afternoon at a hardware store where a teenage boy named Trey called me ma'am so earnestly I nearly cried. When the deadbolt resisted, Lena stepped back, surprised. She rang the bell again, twice, then texted, "Mom, this is ridiculous. Let me in." I turned the sound down until the world was just the clock. Finally permitted to keep time. The next morning, I was at the bank at 9:05 in a line of people worried about different versions of the same thing. Ellen came out from her office when she saw me. "Mrs. Ellis," she said. and her face did a thing faces do when they're expecting a mortgage question and get a betrayal instead. Come back with me. I handed her the revocation, the TRO filing, and the contact information for Ava. I told her about the recorded deed and the white van and the girl with the clipboard who had looked at me like a clerical error. When I finished, Ellen sat back, hands steepled in a posture that is either prayer or math. We'll put an alert on your profile and a freeze on any withdrawal attempts under that power of attorney, she said. If anyone presents it, we escalate to legal. I'll also make sure your accounts require in-person verification for any big movements for the next 30 days. And I'll put a note on your safe deposit access. She paused. Do you have automatic payments tied to anything your daughter might try to cancel? My insurance, I said, and the electric. We'll watch those, she said, and I'll flag your daughter's name. If she calls, we will require counsel. I went from there to Dr. Patel's office. She was running late. The magazines in the waiting room were the same two issues, fanned out like an optimistic peacock. When she finally came in, she took my hands. Nina called me, she said. Are you okay? I told her the headline version. She shook her head the way doctors do when a body they'd like to be simple is not. Then she did what she's done for years. She examined, she asked, she listened. She gave me a cognitive screening whose questions made me feel like I'd been asked to prove I exist. Draw a clock, subtract by sevens, remember 3 words I would have preferred to forget. When we were done, she wrote a letter. This certifies that my patient, Marjorie Ruth Ellis, is presently of sound mind and fully capable of making her own decisions. She signed it with the blue pen she uses to sign prescriptions for blood pressure and sanity. By noon, I felt armed. Not with weapons, but with paper. Paper can be sharper than knives. Paper can slice without anyone seeing the wound until it bleeds on the carpet. At 3:20, Ava called. We're on the docket at 9 a.m. tomorrow for an emergency hearing on the TRO, she said. Judge Cole. She's thoughtful, but no nonsense. Bring yourself and the original POA. Bring Nina if you can. Lena? I asked. She'll be notified. Let's see if she bothers to show. That night, I slept like the house had put its arms around me. I woke before dawn and watched the light gather in the kitchen like resolve. I put on Bill's fishing hat because sometimes you wear armor you know a man would have admired. The courthouse smelled like pine sol and ghosts. Ava met me by the elevators with a small smile that said she was ready to argue with anyone for anything if the person she was arguing for had a decent face. Nina was already there, perched on a bench like a stork who'd learned court language as a second mother tongue. We went in. Judge Cole took the bench, square-shouldered, no jewelry but a watch with a face large enough to make punctuality a character trait. She heard the case before ours. A zoning matter so dry I felt my eyelids consider unionizing. And then she said my name. The clerk called us. I stood because my years in a classroom taught me that standing can be a way of showing respect for the moment when the rules matter. Ava argued, crisp and calm. She held up the recorded deed like it had personally offended her. She explained the power of attorney, the revocation, the surprise. She explained the risk to me, to my shelter, to my safety. She used the phrase irreparable harm like it was a nail and she had a hammer. The judge nodded. Opposing counsel stood. Brocade tie, the courtroom confidence of someone who never took attendance. He represented the buyer. He talked about contract rights, reliance, the market, timelines. He called the timeline aggressive, as if speed is a virtue until it becomes a misdemeanor. He mentioned the inspection and the pre-close access addendum, and then made a show of being offended that anyone had objected to a little demolition before the close. "Where is Ms. Mahoney?" Judge Cole asked. "Unavailable," the buyer's lawyer said, which is a word lawyers use when the truth is messy. Ava turned. "Your Honor, I have a witness," she said, and signaled Nina, who stood and walked like a woman who respected both the law and her own shoes. She told the court about the van, the clipboard, the cellars being described as my estate. Judge Cole stared over the top of her glasses at the buyer's counsel. "And your client did not find that phrase somewhat alarming?" He shifted, then said, "Your Honor, our client relied on the public record." The public record that included a deed less than a week old from an attorney in fact using a power of attorney executed shortly after the principal's husband died? The judge asked. No red flags? Opposing counsel said they weren't in the business of policing family dynamics. The judge looked like she wanted to explain what business they were in, but she held the lecture back like a woman who has learned to wait for the right moment. She granted the temporary restraining order. No transfer of title, no entry, no demolition, and no enforcement of any pre-close access agreement and pending a hearing on the merits, she said, tapping her pen twice. Then she looked at me. "Miss Ellis, do you have a safe place to stay?" "I'm staying home," I said. Her mouth almost smiled. "Good," she said. When we walked out into the glare of day, the buyer's lawyer stopped Ava, his expression a mix of irritation and practicality. "Your client should consider making this easy," he said. "We have money on the line." Ava looked at him the way you look at a plate of oysters when you're allergic. "Bring your investor to the table," she said. "In the meantime, step foot on my client's property and I'll file contempt before you can say tort." He blinked. We walked away. Outside on the courthouse steps, my phone buzzed with a text from Lena. "Mom, this is getting out of hand. You embarrassed me today. Caleb says the buyers could sue us for damages and specific performance, and we'll all lose." I typed, "My house is not a we," and hit send. After the hearing, everything sped up and slowed down at the same time. Days stretched and snapped. Ava filed our lawsuit seeking rescission of the deed, declaratory judgment that the use of the power of attorney was unauthorized and improper, and an injunction to unwind everything. She added a claim for elder financial exploitation and breach of fiduciary duty. Big words, big stakes. In the afternoons, I watered the marigolds and sat on the back steps counting the ways people surprise you. In the mornings, I printed out every email and text. I bought a 3-ring binder and labeled sections the way teachers do when they plan units. Deed, POA, bank, doctor, evidence, communications. I printed the photograph from my doorbell camera of Lena standing on my porch with her key and wrote the date and time underneath like a caption in an exhibit. It felt like homework, and I've always been good at homework. 2 days after the hearing, a woman named Teresa from the title company called, her voice too bright. "Ms. Ellis, we received a letter from Ms. Rosen. We want to ensure you're being taken care of, but there are contractual deadlines we have to consider. If you could just sign a ratification." "Teresa," I said, "do you have a mother?" "I do," she said, a little softer. "Imagine someone showing up at her door with an addendum to sign because they didn't want to lose a deadline," I said. "Imagine you calling to ask her to make your job easier." She was quiet, then said, "I'll note your file as contested." We'll hold that night at 8:30. 2 men in a truck I didn't recognize parked across the street and stared at my house like it had offended them at a bar. I watched from behind the curtain and memorized the shape of their impatience. Nina made me call the non-emergency line. When a cruiser swung by slow, the men slunk away. I didn't sleep much. I kept replaying the way one of them pointed at the roofline and the other nodded, as if agreeing to a fact that involved me without me. On Friday, Ava called. "We'll need to depose the notary who notarized your POA and the notarization on the deed. I also want to depose your daughter. In the meantime, I received an email from their counsel hinting at a possible guardianship petition." I swallowed. "Let them try." "They may file and ask for an emergency evaluation," she said. "We'll be ready. Do not let a social worker into your home without me there. If anyone comes with papers, call me, and call Nina. Actually, call Nina first. She lives closer." That afternoon, while I was folding towels, the doorbell rang. I looked at the camera. It was Lena, hair pulled back in a careful ponytail that tried to make her look younger, more earnest. I went to the door, but didn't open it. "Mom," she said through the wood, voice wobbly, "please, can you let me in? We need to talk. Not about buyers or deadlines, just us talk," I said. "I'm listening." A silence like someone calculating how the words will fall. "I went to HR today," she said. I asked about our elder care benefits. I told them you were struggling and that I needed days off to handle your transition to assisted living. I leaned my forehead to the door. I made pot roast this week, I said. I filed affidavits. I went to the bank. I sat in court. I am not transitioning anywhere. You put your sweater in the oven last month, she blurted. I blinked. What? The red cardigan. I found it. It smelled like garlic. Mom, you told me you were warming it. I almost laughed. I set it on the counter after I took a casserole out. The oven was off, I remembered that day, remembered being clumsy with grief for no reason, and then remembering the reason. In moments like that, memory can make a heart look like a kitchen. You forgot my birthday, she said, her voice pleading now with her own history. Last year. You've never ever forgotten I remembered that too. A January day 2 weeks after the date I do not say out loud if I can help it. The day Bill had died 5 years earlier. I had forgotten her birthday because grief will steal dates and leave you with the shape of a month. And when I realized, I'd driven 40 minutes in sleet with a grocery store cake and the kind of apology that lives in its own weather. Lena had accepted it with grace then. Grace must have an expiration date in some homes. You sold my house, I said, and the words felt like pulling a splinter that is really a stake. I used what you gave me, she said, voice flattening, trying a different approach. You gave me the power of attorney, Mom. You signed it. You said you trusted me. I trusted you to use it when I couldn't speak for myself, I said. Not to sell my house under me because the market was hot. I only wanted you safe, she said, and that word, safe, felt like a trap set with peanut butter. Put that in writing, I said, and send it to my lawyer. She pounded once on the door with the soft part of her fist. You are being cruel, she said, and then I heard her footsteps retreat. That night I made tea and sat in the dark. It's funny what you remember when you think your life is being appraised. When Lena was 12, she had a friend named Bree who stole my lipstick. I didn't care about the lipstick. I cared about the look on my daughter's face when she lied to protect Bree. She looked brave then, even noble, the way girls do when they're sure the world is a team sport. The lie tasted better to her than the betrayal of a friend. That's when I knew. People pick their truths the way people pick their teams. Sometimes the team wins. On Monday, we deposed the notary. Her name was Sylvia, a woman of 60 with a real estate license, a floral scarf, and a smile that had sold houses that felt like home to people who wanted to live inside a magazine. She sat overly straight and said she remembered the signing because she remembered every signing. And where did the principal sign? Ava asked. In my office, Sylvia said. On what date? Sylvia named a date 2 weeks after Bill's funeral. And who was present? Ms. Ellis, her daughter, myself. Ava slid a photograph across the table. It was from that day, printed from my phone. My friend Dottie holding me in the kitchen while a casserole sat like a co-conspirator on the counter. The timestamp read the date of the signing. Is that your office? Ava asked. Sylvia blinked. No, of course not. Would you like to revise your testimony? Ava asked gently, voice a small knife with a pretty handle. I sometimes notarize in homes, Sylvia said. Did you notarize this power of attorney in Ms. Ellis's home? Ava asked. I don't recall, Sylvia said. So, you remember every signing until we ask about this one, Ava said. Did you check identification? Yes, Sylvia said. What form? A driver's license, she said. Which one? Ava asked. The notary blinked again, slower this time. I don't understand. Was it Miss Ellis's license before she changed her address or after? Did you record the number in your journal? I keep an electronic log now. Produce it, Ava said. We took a break and Sylvia's lawyer ushered her out into the hall. When they returned, Sylvia's scarf had been rearranged into a different kind of armor. I have to correct my testimony, she said. I actually notarized the deed in my office, not the power of attorney. The POA may have been done at Miss Ellis's kitchen table. I may have notarized based on my knowledge of the signers. Your knowledge, Ava said. Your knowledge that Ms. Ellis was signing a document that gave her daughter the power to sell her house without notice. Sylvia's eyes went glassy. I knew she was grieving, she whispered, as if grief makes us fit like a key into any lock. Ava let the silence do the work. Afterward, in the hallway, Nina muttered, "That one's going to meet the Secretary of State's disciplinary page." On Wednesday, Lena filed the guardianship petition. It arrived like a well-pressed suit, a stack of allegations, confusion, forgetfulness, unsafe behaviors. It included a sworn declaration from my son-in-law, Caleb, attesting that he'd found the gas on once and that he'd watched me stand in the cereal aisle for 10 minutes, disoriented. It included a statement from someone I'd never met, a woman Lena said was a social worker friend who wrote I had declined in executive functioning. The hearing was set for the following Tuesday. Ava told me to expect a home visit. None came. I spent the days before in a strange calm, the eye of a storm where you can see people moving in every direction and all you can do is fold towels and bake something that makes the house smell like a house. On Sunday, Ben came by. Ben is my neighbor's grown son who still calls me Mrs. Ellis, even though I've told him to call me Marjorie. He changed a light bulb that required a ladder and a sense of humor. When he came down, he stood awkwardly in my kitchen, his hands too big for his pockets. "My mom told me," he said, "about Lena. Do you want me to install a camera out back? I can do it with my phone." "Thank you," I said. "I want to know who the night belongs to when I'm not looking." He installed a camera above the back door and an extra motion sensor on the gate. That night at 2:06 a.m., my phone vibrated with an alert. I sat up, heart in my throat. The screen showed a figure at the back steps, hood up, moving like someone who has learned to make their weight invisible. The figure crouched by the gas meter, then stood and walked quickly toward the driveway. The next clip caught them slipping into a black SUV. The license plate was half visible. The camera had done its job like a workhorse. I sent the clips to Ava. She wrote back, "Saved. Do not worry. Sleep Tuesday's guardianship hearing was in a courtroom smaller than the one for the TRO. It had a tired flag and a seal that had watched this county try to be its best self for 100 years. Lena sat at the petitioner's table, Caleb beside her in a suit that made him look like a man he might have been if he had been raised by wolves with manners. Lena didn't turn around to look at me. I looked at the back of her head and thought of all the times I had braided those strands into something that wouldn't fall apart during recess. Her lawyer spoke about safety and love. He painted me as a woman adrift, forgetting names, dates, the basics of the day. He mentioned the oven. He mentioned the gas. He mentioned the cereal aisle. He mentioned my not answering my phone, which I did not because sometimes a woman doesn't want to be a bell that's rung. Ava stood and placed Dr. Patel's letter on the evidence table. She called Dr. Patel to testify. Dr. Patel answered each question like a metronome. In my medical opinion, Ms. Ellis is of sound mind, oriented to person, place, and time, competent to manage her personal and financial affairs. She said it with the ease of someone who knew the sound of competence. She also added, because she is a person before she is a doctor, and she is stubborn, which I consider an asset. Ava then played the night clip. The judge watched, impassive, as the figure crouched by the meter. Ava paused, looked at the judge. "Your Honor, the motion sensor that captured this video was installed by a neighbor after the TRO. I subpoenaed the gas company this morning. They've already replied that they received an anonymous report of a gas leak at Ms. Ellis's address at 1:58 a.m., but found no leak." Ava turned to Lena's table. "Ms. Mahoney," she said, "did you or your husband file that report?" Lena's mouth opened and closed. Caleb leaned forward and whispered something that made her shoulders pull up like a turtle. "No," she said softly. "Your Honor, whether or not the petitioner filed the report's timing, and the presence of a person at the meter suggests someone is creating the evidence they now rely upon to claim Ms. Ellis is unsafe. I suggest the danger here is to Miss Ellis, not from her." Judge Cole, different courtroom, same judge, took her glasses off and set them on the bench like she wanted to set down the nonsense too. "Petition denied," she said. There is insufficient evidence to establish incapacity and significant evidence to suggest family conflict around financial decisions. I will not be used as a tool in a property dispute. Ms. Mahoney, if you file again without new evidence, I will consider sanctions." Lena nodded, tears standing obediently in her eyes like soldiers. I wanted to believe them, those tears. I had instructed my daughter in how to cry. I had taught her that tears were for injury, not strategy. Children adapt. After the hearing, Caleb approached me in the hallway, his face a polite mask that didn't fit. "Ms. Ellis," he said, "this isn't personal." "That," I said, "is your problem." He leaned in a fraction. "You're putting your daughter in a bad spot," he said. "If this deal falls through, we lose money we can't afford to lose, and you could lose more." Ava stepped between us. "Say one more word to my client without me present," she said, "and I'll file a protective order that includes your voice." He stepped back. He smiled. It looked like something a taxidermist might have arranged on a coyote. The buyer's counsel approached then, looking less composed than before. "Our managing member wants a meeting," he told Ava. "He didn't sign up for this." In Ava's office the next day, we sat across from a man named Richie, who wore a blazer over a t-shirt like he wanted to split the difference between tech and court. He said he was in the business of revitalizing housing stock, which is a phrase people use when they want to charge more for the same square footage. "We relied on the public record," he said. "We didn't do anything wrong." "You did everything fast," Ava said. "Fast isn't wrong. It's dangerous. The question is how much danger you want to absorb." He spread his hands. "I don't want a lawsuit." "Then you walk," Ava said, and slid a document across the table. "This is a mutual rescission agreement. You get your deposit back minus your actual out-of-pocket costs, to the extent they're real, not just your staging guy's cousin. You sign this and we file a stipulation with the court that we have no claims against you. You file the same. You walk away and let the family fight it out in therapy or state court or the court of public opinion. Or you can sit in that jury box while 12 people who've watched their own parents get sold out decide whether they like your blazer." He glanced at me then, for the first time, like remembering there were people in this story. Something in his face softened. "I had a grandmother's, he said, which is a sentence that sounds like an apology if the rest is true. He signed. The buyer walked. The lawsuit continued, and we focused it where it always belonged, on my daughter and my son-in-law and the papers they used like a crowbar. Discovery is a process that could bore a saint. It mostly bored me. But when the bank statements arrived, subpoenaed from an account Lena had opened as Marjorie Ellis Household Management, an account I'd never seen, I felt something inside me colder than anything I'd felt yet. There were transfers from my savings in increments small enough to avoid attention and large enough to dent a life. There were payments to a company called Javelin Ridge Capital, a lender that avails itself of the word capital the way thieves avail themselves of unlocked cars. There were Venmo payments with emojis that meant more when you knew the people, a Saturday night out, a new set of golf clubs, a baby shower I wasn't invited to. Ava traced the wires like a woman solving a maze. Red pen, patience, fury. They used your POA and your online banking to move money into an account they controlled, she said, and from there, into their own. We'll amend our complaint to add conversion, fraud, and civil theft. And we'll send this to the district attorney. I looked at the pages. My name in the header didn't make me feel like the owner of anything. Papers can tell you who you are and also tell you you're disposable. The DA's office took the case. An investigator named Hargrove, a woman with eyes like a shade of blue you don't paint walls because you'd never relax, came to my house, sat on my couch, and asked me to tell her everything from the beginning. I told her about the van and the clipboard and the word estate. She nodded. She asked if anyone had pressured me to sign the power of attorney in the first place. I said grief had pressured me. She wrote that down, careful, like a question she might ask again later. Lena called, she texted. The messages grew stranger, as if vagueness might finally convince me. We can fix this. You know I love you. Caleb says if you drop it, he can get us into an even better place. This is tearing us apart. Mom, are you happy now? I let Ava handle the responses. She responded rarely, and when she did, she used letters like a veterinarian uses a tranquilizer gun, only when necessary, then 2 darts to be sure. When the day came for Lena's deposition, I felt like I was walking into a gymnasium on the day of the spelling bee. I sat in a chair against the wall of a conference room and watched my daughter swear to tell the truth. Ava asked her the question slowly. "When did you first consider selling your mother's house?" "I don't know," Lena said. "Before or after your husband took out a hard money loan from Javelin Ridge Capital?" Ava asked. Lena blinked. "After," she said, then looked like she wanted that word back. "Did you believe you had the authority to sell your mother's house without her knowledge or consent?" "Yes," Lena said. "She gave me the power of attorney." "For what purpose?" Ava asked. "For if she couldn't make her own decisions." "Was she making her own pot roasts?" Ava asked. "That's not how it works," Lena said, and her voice broke and mended. "Did you tell your mother you were under contract?" Ava asked. "I was going to surprise her," Lena said, and something about the way she said surprise made me feel like I had been pushed off a dock at night. "Did you contact any assisted living facilities on her behalf?" Ava asked. "Yes," Lena said. "I took tours." "Before or after you signed the purchase agreement?" Ava asked. "Before," Lena said. "We wanted it to be seamless." "And what was your timeline?" Ava asked. "The close was scheduled for June 30th, Lena said. "We were going to move her July 1st. "You were going to move a woman out of her house the day after you sold it, without telling her beforehand," Ava said. "We would have told her," Lena said. "We would have made it a celebration." "What were you going to celebrate?" Ava asked, and no one spoke. Caleb's deposition was uglier because truth never sat comfortably in him. Ava asked about the loan, and he said, "Every investor uses leverage," which is a thing people say when they want to claim their gambling is strategy. She asked about the 2 men in the truck, and he said he didn't know anything about men or trucks. She asked about the gas meter, and he smiled the way people smile when they know a camera can't smell the gasoline on their fingers. Ava measured him with her eyes and moved on. She didn't need him to hang himself. She just needed him to stand on the stool. The plea from the DA's office came faster than I expected. They charged Caleb with exploitation of an elderly person, a felony. They charged Lena with attempted exploitation, a lesser felony. There would be hearings. There would be an opportunity to plead. My gut, which had been busy for months, took a break to let my heart feel tired. When Lena called that night, I answered. Not because I wanted to, because something in me still recognized the toddler who had needed me to help her put her shoes on the right feet. "Mom," she said, and cried. Not pretend crying, not weaponized crying, the kind of crying that makes a person sound like they are trying to hand you pieces of something they dropped and cannot pick up alone. "I'm so sorry." She said the words like they were heavier than all the words that had come before. "I thought I was helping. I thought you'd be safer. I didn't want to see you fall." Caleb kept saying the market. He always says the market. And then the loan. We were in over our heads, and I couldn't see another way out. "You sold my house," I said, because repetition can be a kindness when truth has been slippery. "I tried to," she said. "You stopped me. You stopped me like you used to stop me from running into the street." I sat quietly. "What do you want to do now?" I asked. "I want to plead," she said. "I want to tell the DA that I'll testify against Caleb. I want to pay you back, even if it takes 10 years. I want to—" She stopped, and for a moment there was just the sound of breath, hers and mine and the house's, a chorus older than either of us. "I want to be your daughter again," she said. "You don't get to choose the timing of people's integrity. It's like rain in July. You receive it and water the tomatoes." We agreed to meet, with Ava present. At Ava's office, Lena sat small in a chair that had been sufficient for every kind of liar and every kind of truth-teller. Her face was bare. The armor had been checked at a door I hoped I'd never have to help her locate again. "I will cooperate," she said to Ava. "I will testify to what Caleb did, to what I did." I used the power because it was easier than asking. I rationalized. I'm good at rationalizing. I told myself we were saving my mom. I told myself being in control was love. Ava nodded, not indulgent, not cruel. "We'll talk to the DA," she said. "They'll want documentation and evidence of remorse that looks like something other than tears." "What does that look like?" Lena asked. "Money," Ava said. "Behavior." Weeks, months. We left it there. Ava called the DA. The DA agreed to discuss a plea for Lena conditioned on her testimony and restitution. For Caleb, there would be no plea that didn't taste like punishment. The DA's office wanted him. There are wolves and there are dogs that look like wolves, and there are men who buy suits to hide their teeth. Summer tilted toward itself. The TRO became a preliminary injunction. The Elias Pendens remained. The rescission suit crept toward a settlement with Lena. She would stipulate that the deed was void, that the POA had been misused, that she owed me money. I wrote a number on a piece of paper that made me nauseous, and then halved it and halved it again because you cannot make back time. I met with a financial planner who spoke gently and did not try to sell me anything. We set up a trust for the house, revocable and boring, the kind of boring that saves lives. We appointed a professional trustee, a woman named Donna, who had shoulders like a real estate agent and ethics like a librarian. I removed Lena as my agent under everything. I updated my will. In my new will, I gave Lena something I could live with, a bequest conditioned on what Ava called adult behavior. If she paid me back under the restitution schedule and maintained sobriety from schemes for 5 years. Ava used different words. I would leave her the lake cabin that had been in Bill's family. If she didn't, the cabin would go to a scholarship fund for kids of our town who wanted to learn how to make things with their hands. Bill would have liked that. The DA set a trial date. Caleb's lawyer blustered and filed motions like smoke screens. Lena took the stand for the state in a pre-trial hearing and told the truth, a thing I wasn't sure I would see in that exact shape again. She said, "I did this, and the courtroom did what courtrooms sometimes do when honesty enters. It breathed differently. On the morning of the trial, I made biscuits because making food is the way I remind myself that I can make something from ingredients that do not love each other. Nina drove me to court, her lips a thin line. She wore a brooch shaped like a gavel because she has a sense of humor that some judges would have liked. The prosecutor, Hargrove, stood up in front of a jury of people who had parents and children and a history with mortgages that looked like a diary with too many entries in red. She told them the story I had been living. Power, trust, paper, van. She played the doorbell cam clip. She put my bank statements on a screen big enough to make an old woman feel like a billboard. She asked me to tell them about the day the van came. I told it gently, because sometimes gentleness is more devastating than rage. Caleb's lawyer cross-examined like a man trying to find purchase on ice. He suggested that I had been confused. He suggested I had given permission and then forgotten. He suggested the market was as much to blame as his client. He suggested there had been no exploitation, just a misunderstanding between generations. He forgot that juries are made of generations. Lena testified with her shoulders down and her hands folded like church, even though the church she was in has no hymns. She told them she had used my login information to set up the household account. She told them Caleb had come up with the idea to move money in increments. She told them about the Javelin Ridge loan and the penalties. She told them she'd been afraid and had chosen wrong. She cried quietly, like a person discovering that crying is not the same thing as convincing. Caleb did not testify. Men like him rarely put themselves under oath because oaths are for people who believe in something they cannot see. The verdict came in less than a day. Guilty on exploitation. Guilty on attempted exploitation for Lena's part, but by then, her plea had been finalized. The jury's verdict for her counted only for the record. Caleb faced sentencing. The judge used words like predatory and pattern and breach of trust. He got time. Not enough to undo anything, but enough to make a point that I felt in my bones. Afterward, on the courthouse steps, Nina hugged me with the fierceness of a friend who has practiced this embrace on other women and other steps. "I want to go home," I said. And I did. Home. The word had survived. I opened my front door and stepped into the place that still smelled faintly like pot roast and lemon squares and old wood that had watched an entire family make itself and then try to unmake itself for money. We had a lot to do still. The civil suit settled with Lena signing a confession of judgment for restitution. We set a payment schedule she would owe for years. She found a job at a nonprofit that taught budgeting to women leaving bad relationships. I let myself smile at the cosmic balancing act of that. She went to counseling, she said. She sent letters, not texts. I wrote back sometimes. I kept copies in the binder under communications because a part of me has learned more than I wanted to about evidence. One Saturday in September, Lena knocked. I opened the door. She stood there with a shoebox and a look like she had found something under her bed that she wanted to return to the person it belonged to. "It's Dad's tackle box," she said, almost a whisper. "Caleb took the lures that are worth anything, but this—" She laughed once gently. "This smells like your garage." I took it. The box had a sticker on it from a bait shop that closed 20 years ago. Inside, the lures lay like their own tiny cathedral of color. There was a note on top in Bill's slanted handwriting, for when you need to remember the difference between patience and waiting. He always wrote like that, little sermons to nobody in particular that turned out to be for me. Lena and I sat at the kitchen table and ate peaches over the sink the way we did when she was 9, and everything was messy and good and summer. We didn't try to solve our lives in a day. We didn't even try to agree on the past. We talked about the PTA fundraiser she'd planned in 4th grade like it was the mayor's inauguration, and we laughed so hard at Caleb's expense that for a split second I felt sorry for the worst parts of him, a mercy I allowed and then put away. "I changed my therapist," she said offhand, like someone has learned to note a weather change without demanding a parade. "This one makes me write letters I don't send. Today she told me to write a letter to your house. How does that go?" I asked. "Dear house," she said, and we both looked at the window like a person might look back. "I'm sorry I tried to take your bones without asking your permission." We sat there a while longer, and the late summer light came in slanted and quiet, the kind of light that makes even the dust look holy. I poured coffee. I put sugar in mine because there are days when bitterness needs help losing. After she left, I called Ava. I told her I wanted to set up one more thing. "It's called a letter of wishes," I said, "for the trust." "Tell me," she said. "I want it to say that if, after 5 years, Lena has kept the restitution schedule, stayed in counseling, stopped rationalizing her way out of apologies, and shown up for supper twice a month without asking for anything, I want the trustee to consider giving her more than the cabin. I don't want to cut her off to feel powerful. I want to give her a path back to being the girl who cried when Bree got caught stealing my lipstick. Not because of the lipstick, but because truth mattered then." Ava was quiet for a long second, the kind of quiet professionals reserve for moments when they remember they are also daughters. "I'll draft it," she said, "and when you're ready, we'll sign it." The day we signed the letter of wishes, I wore Bill's hat. Nina came. She brought lemon squares again because rituals matter. We signed the letter in blue ink. Donna, the trustee, signed where she was supposed to and looked at me the way bankers look at people who understand that most of life is managing expectations. On the way home, Nina said, "Do you think she'll make it? The 5 years?" "I think about what I can nurture," I said. "I can nurture the tomatoes. I can nurture my peace. I can nurture a structure that rewards my daughter for being a person I always believed she was, whether or not the evidence cooperated." That fall, I planted daffodil bulbs along the fence. You plant bulbs the way you sign papers. You do it for your future self, not the current you who'd rather sit and watch a show about other people's kitchens. Winter came like a theater curtain, and then spring. Lena came to supper most Sundays. Sometimes she peeled potatoes with me. Sometimes she left early because grief has its own bedtime. She brought pie once and apologized that it was from a store. I told her the truth. Store pies are fine when the intention is homemade. I started volunteering at the elementary school again, 2 mornings a week in the reading corner. The kids showed me their teeth with the pride of new keys. I showed them how books with spines can make you feel like you've borrowed a spine yourself. One little girl, Evie, asked if she could call me Grandma even though I am not her anything. I told her yes, you can adopt people without paperwork. When the civil settlement documents finally came, they were a stack heavy enough to make a person rethink literacy. I initialed and signed, Lena signed, the judge signed, the clerk stamped. On the day the last paper was filed, I stood in my driveway and looked at the house. The cedar out back shook in a wind that knows what it's doing. I thought about the men with the laser measure, about Sylvia's scarf, about Richie's blazer and the word estate. I thought about a young woman with a hard hat and a clipboard on my porch, saying, "We didn't expect anyone to be home." I thought about how often people count old women out of the homes they own before they're ready. I went inside. I made a sandwich with too much mustard. I sat at my table and ate it like I'd earned something. After lunch, I pulled out my binder. I wrote a new section tab in my tidy teacher handwriting, Aftermath. Under it, I slipped the letter of wishes and a photograph Nina took of me on the courthouse steps the day of Caleb's sentencing. Sunlight on my face, Bill's hat in my hand. In late June, a year after the white van, I held a yard sale for all the things I'd kept for other people's comfort. Folding chairs that only mattered when I was expected to host gatherings I wasn't invited to plan. A rug Lena had picked out when she was 20 that had always scratched a little underfoot. 3 sweaters with moth holes that I'd saved because they smelled like a person I'd been when keeping holes made me feel honest. People came, browsed, haggled. An older man bought the rug for his garage. A young couple took the folding chairs for their tiny backyard wedding. A little boy begged for the moth-eaten sweater because he liked the color and didn't care that the elbow was more air than wool. He put it on standing in the yard and twirled until his mother laughed, and I thought, this is what it means to keep something, to hand it to someone who wants it because of what it is, not what it promises. In August, I drove to the lake cabin alone. I stood on the dock at dusk and apologized to the mosquitoes for being alive. I opened the tackle box, I took out the little folded dollar bill from Bill's hat and put it in the bait shop tip jar, which felt like closing a loop only I'd noticed. I sat on the end of the dock and put my feet in the water and counted the ways a person survives being sold while still living. When I got back, there was a letter from Lena in the mailbox. Not a bill, not a complaint, not an ask, just paper and ink and the possibility of repair. Mom, it read, the handwriting of a woman who has finally learned to slow down in cursive. I know this is not a movie. There is no one speech that fixes it all. I just wanted to tell you that I paid installment 3 early. I wanted you to know that I walked past a house with a coming soon sign and felt my stomach drop like a condemned elevator because I finally understand what that sign must have felt like outside your body. I wanted you to know that I am sitting in a budgeting class where the instructor looks like you and uses words like mercy and spreadsheet in the same sentence. And I am trying, Mom. That's all. I am trying. Love. Lena, I put the letter in the binder under Aftermath. I made a new tab, Mercy, because sometimes you have to index what you don't want to forget. In September, I invited Lena to help me plant bulbs again. We knelt in the dirt that had watched more integrity than most boardrooms and separated bulbs like promises. Some would bloom white, some yellow, some surprise us. We planted too many and not enough. I taught her the trick of planting 3 in a triangle so when they come up, they look like a choice made on purpose. She showed me how to stretch my back so I didn't pay for the garden with my spine. When we were done, we sat on the back steps with lemonade that tasted like someone remembered sugar. The sun slid down behind the cedar. The house made its house noises. Lena turned to me. Mom, she said, do you want me to move in with you when you're 90? I laughed so hard I scared a bird. Ask me when I'm 89, I said. Bring a lawyer. We sat quietly then, in a silence that didn't feel like retreat. It felt like a trust you'd sign only after reading every page. The following spring, the daffodils came up like they'd never heard of betrayal. The marigolds did their low, practical work. The tomatoes muttered to themselves in July and offered their red to anyone who would reach. I kept a bowl by the sink and a pen in the drawer and wrote down little sermons to nobody in particular on scraps of paper I stuck under the magnets on the fridge. Do not sign what you haven't read. Do not read what you haven't lived. Do not live where you cannot sleep. I learned to sleep again. I learned that darkness is trustworthy when you have put good locks on the doors and better locks on your own permission. I learned that in a county office there are women who will stamp your life back into place with a heavy hand and a light heart. I learned that notaries are human, and some of them will meet the Secretary of State the hard way. I learned that judges can anchor a town on a Tuesday. I learned that daughters can get lost until they remember which road goes past their mother's kitchen. I learned that a house is not an asset until someone calls it one. To me, it is a thing with a heart and an address. On the anniversary of the white van, I made pot roast, not because I needed to prove anything, but because making something that takes all day can be a prayer. I sat at my table and ate slowly. I called Nina and told her to come get lemon square tacks, which is the portion she claims in exchange for every legal pad she filled. She came with her brooch and a smile. We ate and argued about whether to move the hydrangea. Before she left, she squeezed my shoulder. "You did it," she said. "What did I do?" I asked. "You kept the house," she said, "and yourself." After she went home, I stood in the doorway and watched the street I've watched for 43 years. The light had that honeyed look you only get in September when the angle finally makes painters sigh. A boy on a bike rode past without either hand on the handlebars, and I said a quiet prayer to the God of scraped knees. The cedar lifted its arms and put them down again, untroubled, forgiving. Inside, the dishwasher grumbled like an old friend. I looked at the hat on the peg and the letter on the mantel and the binder on the shelf and the marigolds out back and the daffodils asleep under the soil, keeping their promise. I'm an old woman. I'm not an estate. I'm a person who signed a paper and then signed a better one, who let a daughter fall and watched her learn to stand. I am the owner of a house and the renter of a body and the friend of women who know the rules. I write little sermons on scraps and plant hope about 6 inches deep so the squirrels leave it alone. The day the city inspector came by, months later, to check on a permit the buyer had pulled before they walked, he stood at my door and shuffled his clipboard. "Mrs. Ellis," he said. "We had a note to follow up on an open permit." I poured him lemonade. I showed him my rescission paper. I saw the moment the words went from abstract to delicate. He had a mother. He had a house. He smiled. He closed the permit on his tablet. "You're all set," he said, and tipped an imaginary hat to Bill's real one hanging by the door. You cannot teach men to tip hats that don't exist. They either know or they don't. When he left, I went to my desk and wrote another scrap and stuck it under the magnet shaped like a fish that Ben's boy made me at Vacation Bible School. Close what is open what is closed. Windows, hearts, files, cases. Keep the door you love and the door you must lock. Some evenings I sit on the back steps and imagine that girl with the hard hat at my door again. I imagine opening the door and saying, "Come in. Let me show you what a house looks like when it belongs to the person inside it." I would show her the binder, not because she asked, but because you never know when a person might need to learn how to become their own clerk. I would slice her a piece of pie. I would tell her 2 things. Read everything twice, and don't underestimate old women who knit sweaters and file affidavits in the same afternoon. Lena sometimes brings me tulips now. She puts them in a jar and isn't offended when I write "gift" on a piece of masking tape and stick it on the jar like an evidence tag because some habits become jokes that keep you honest. We sit and talk about the PTA chair she can't stand and the accountant at the nonprofit who loves decimals too much. We do not talk about the white van. We do not need to. It stopped at the corner of our lives and turned around. I wish Bill could see the way the light sits in the living room around 4 in the afternoon in late summer. It lies there like a cat, lazy and invincible. I wish he could watch me argue with professionals and order something other than the cheapest breakfast on the menu at the diner without apologizing. I wish he could see Lena's hands when she peels potatoes. the way they look like mine and his at the same time, steady now, finally, cautious but not afraid. I don't know what happens next. Maybe Lena keeps her job in her humility. Maybe she marries a man who is not a salesman for a house he doesn't live in. Maybe I get older and my knees complain and we install a rail on the back steps with Ben's help. Maybe I put the house into a trust that nobody can take without asking the woman at the dinner table. Maybe I am buried under the maple out back that drops leaves like letters every October. Maybe not. The future is a neighborhood you pretend to know and only understand when you move in. What I do know is this. The sound of a stamp thudding down on a county document can be a benediction. A judge can be a mother in a black robe when she looks at a man and says, "No." A daughter can learn to apologize only after a jury makes room for the word to mean something. A pot roast can hold a house together better than an LLC. A letter of wishes can be a bridge if you walk on it carefully in daylight. And lemon squares baked by a woman who knows how to use a legal pad can be a sacrament. Sometimes when the house is quiet and the cedar is being a cedar, I open the tackle box and run my fingers over the lures like rosary beads. I do not fish. I say the names of things I have kept. This roof, this table, this name on this deed, this daughter's chance, this old woman's dignity. I say them under my breath until they sound like someone else's story, and then I say them louder because they are mine. The other day, a letter came from the HOA, politely reminding residents about lawn heights and winterizing. It had a line at the bottom that made me smile. We appreciate everyone's cooperation in maintaining the integrity of the neighborhood. Integrity is a thing you maintain, like a lawn, like a life. I took the scissors and cut the line out and taped it to the inside of the binder under mercy. This morning, the doorbell rang. I checked the camera, a delivery driver with a box and a hopeful shrug. I opened the door. He handed me the box like it contained either danger or joy. It contained bulbs. Tulips, my favorite kind, the ones that bloom with a color that surprises you in a way you should have seen coming. I carried them to the kitchen, set them on the table, and picked up the little paper with the planting instructions. Plant in fall, 6 inches deep, tip up, trust the dark to do its work. So I will. And in the spring, if I'm lucky, the house will be full of color I chose on a day when someone tried to count my inches for their profit and learned that some women count themselves.